Okay. Do you see the recording? Yes. Okay.
Good evening and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thanks to our advisory group members and members of the public for joining Plan Charlestown Advisory Group meeting this evening. We're just going to give it a few more minutes to let AG members and members of the public log on. Just going to give it 60 more seconds and then we can get started. I just want to thank and acknowledge Ellie Sanchez for joining us. Ellie is with the Consular Clerk's office. Thanks, Ellie. If there's any other elected officials or representatives of elected officials, please enter your name in the chat or raise your virtual hand. I'm happy to call on you. All right, let's do this. Let's get started, and then we'll give ourselves plenty of time at the end of the presentation for questions, comments, and discussion. So good evening again. Thank you and welcome to our advisory group members and members of the public for joining us tonight for Plan Charlestown's advisory group meeting. This is our 7th advisory group meeting. So thank you to our dedicated volunteers, advisory group members for helping to advise and act as ambassadors to the Plan Charlestown process. We greatly appreciate your time and commitment to the process, and thank you so much. Next slide. Just a reminder that my name is Jason or Jay Ruggiero. Just go back to that first slide real quick. My email address is on, sorry, don't worry about it, Trish. My email address will be put in the chat, but if anyone wants to talk more about Plan Charlestown, the BPDA, anything going on at City Hall, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm a community engagement manager at the BPDA, so please use me as a resource to get any of your questions answered or let me help you bring City Hall to you. So thank you. Just a reminder that tonight's meeting is being recorded. It's also possible that others are recording. So if you would like to remain anonymous, that's perfectly fine. Just keep your microphone and camera off and you will remain anonymous throughout the evening. We do post all of our meetings and events on the Plan Charlestown webpage, and the link to the Plan Charlestown webpage is right there. I can also put in the chat. So if anyone wants to review tonight's materials or any past Plan Charleston materials. The Plan Charleston webpage is a great resource, and like I said, retains all of the materials, events, and feedback that we also receive through this process. So tonight's meeting is being recorded and posted to the Plan Charleston webpage later this week. Next slide. We're hosting tonight's meeting via Zoom, and specifically Zoom meeting. So it does allow you capabilities, access to manage those capabilities. So just a few tips and tricks to help engage and interact with us this evening. The chat function is enabled and will remain enabled throughout the evening. So if you want to just talk to us, whether it's during the presentation or after, you can use that chat box or at the bottom. You can raise your virtual hand. We probably won't see it if you're waving at us. So just, you can either click the raise hand button at the bottom or click the participants tab and virtually raise your hand that way. Like I said, we're recording the meeting, but you can keep yourself muted with the camera off if you'd like. If you're speaking, we do encourage you to turn your camera on. You do not have to, but like I said, you can manage those functions yourself. So those are just some tips to help interact with us this evening. Next slide. Just some etiquette to make tonight's meeting as enjoyable and as pleasant for everyone as possible. We do ask everyone to remain muted until you're called on. If you would like to speak at any point, you can just raise your virtual hand. The chat function is going to stay enabled and open during the meeting. We do ask everyone just to kind of hold your questions until the end if possible. If that's not possible, feel free to use that chat function. Please be respectful of everyone's time. We do ask comments to be held to 2 minutes, and we will enforce that. We ask participants to limit questions to one at a time, just so we can give everybody the opportunity to ask a question and engage with us. Like I said, tonight's meeting is an advisory group meeting, so we will give the advisory group the first opportunity to ask questions, but we will allow time at the end of the meeting for members of the public. Like I said, if anyone wants to continue the discussion after tonight, or if you feel you couldn't get your questions or comments answered or responded to, please email me, and I'm happy to arrange a phone call, continue the discussion any way that's convenient to you. Advisory group etiquette, or what we ask of the advisory group. Advisory group members are volunteers, and we do ask advisory group members to act as ambassadors to the larger community. Treat all participants with respect, listen actively and speak thoughtfully, support all voices so that all viewpoints and voices can be heard, and actively participate in the Plan Charlestown events and encourage others to join. Thank you to advisory group members. You're telling your family, friends, and neighbors about this process, and it really helps to drive participation and ensure that all voices and participation in the community is an integral part of this process. That's that. Next slide. Just real quick, we have a code of conduct for the planning initiative. I'm just going to breeze through it, but at a high level, we do host our meetings in a Zoom meeting format, not Zoom webinar. Effectively, that just means you have a lot more capabilities to interact and engage with us. The chat feature will be on tonight, so don't worry about that. We do encourage speakers to turn on your cameras while speaking. You don't have to, but we do encourage it. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes at a time, and try to limit your comments and questions to 1 at a time. Please respect everyone in other viewpoints. We welcome differences of opinions and we encourage that, but please be respectful to staff, staff on the call, and your fellow friends and neighbors. If anyone's violating this or acting unacceptable, we will address that as needed. Hopefully we don't have to ask anyone to leave or mute anyone, but it has happened before. Next slide. Like I said, the Plan Charlestown webpage is right there, and I also put in the chat. I can put it in there again. It's a great place to go to see and review all meeting materials, past recordings, feedback that we received from the community, et cetera, et cetera. So please visit the Plan Charlestown webpage if you would like to learn more, or you can email me, and I'm happy to help. I think I have one more slide maybe. So tonight's agenda, I went through a very quick introduction. Trish is going to take the mic after me and just talk a little bit about the process, some updates, and a recap of the scenarios that we shared. She'll also give a quick update on the Austin Street parking lots. And then you'll hear from our consultants to talk about the scenarios, and then we'll open it up to discussion and conversation with the advisory group and then the general public. My email is again at the bottom if anyone wants to continue the conversation. I will hand it over to Trish.
Thanks, Jay. Hi, everyone. I'm Trish. I'm sure I've met most of you before, but I'm the planning lead for Plan Charlestown. And I'm going to try to make this bit as short as possible so that we can get to the meat of this presentation, which is hearing from our consultants, interborough partners, and their team members about the hybrid scenario. So, like, you've seen this graphic before, but in general, we're still in that middle meaty part of the Plan Charlestown process. So obviously started in 2019, currently in the scenario design and analysis phase. And then we're hoping to have recommendations out to the public for review by spring to summer of this year. So wrapping up pretty soon. There are three buckets of work that Plan Charlestown kind of organizes itself around. Those are zoning recommendation, neighborhood needs analysis, and urban design guidelines. The focus of tonight's presentation and the focus of the scenarios are around zoning recommendations for the historically industrial areas where most of the development pressure is seen and where we can get the most in terms of open space and transit improvements and things like that for the neighborhood. The other two topics that are listed here, Jay and the rest of our team are working on separate engagement processes to get these topics back out to the neighborhood. I know that we've been coming to you a lot with scenarios recently, and by recently I mean in the last 6 to 9 months, but we are coming back out with the progress that we've made in the other two topics very, very soon. So be looking out for updates on those. In general, those three buckets, we have these general timelines that break them down. So in the zoning recommendations timeline, we're sitting in the transit capacity analysis and hybrid scenario creation and feedback. So that feedback is it's public feedback. So that is fall to winter 2023. After that, we will take all of your feedback again and create another iteration of the scenarios, which will be released with the draft plans. So the goal for that draft plan is May of this year, end of May, giving ourselves a few extra weeks there. The needs analysis work is currently, we're coordinating with other agencies to make sure that our findings are matching what other agencies are. So that includes the Mayor's Office of Food Justice, Boston Public Schools, a bunch of different agencies we're in coordination with right now. And then the last one is the urban design guidelines. So we have broken the UD guidelines up into two areas, the historic residential area, and then the historically industrial area, which is where interborough, our consultant scenario tonight will focus on. So the UD guidelines for the historic areas are almost done, and we will be coming out to the public with those shortly for separate public comment. Just as a recap, we released the initial version of the scenarios back in July. Many AG members gave us incredibly helpful insight at an AG meeting that we held in June, and that helped inform some changes that we made to them. So they were released for public comment in July. We had an 8-week-long listening tour, which I'll talk about more, and then we took all of that feedback, took the scenarios, and gave them to our consultant team, who has been hard at work creating a hybrid version that merges the best of both of these two scenarios. So the topic areas that we had covered in these were really focused on transportation, open space, land use, and density. And you'll see that the consultant teams have taken those 4 topic areas and continue to move them forward. The listening tour that we did was, like I said, over the course of 8 weeks. It included 17 events. I won't get back into this too heavily, but we tried to have a really robust process so that we could have as much quality feedback as possible going into the creation of this next version that you'll see tonight. Some photos of that process. And then in general, we collected a total of 952 survey submissions across these 9 topics. And all of those surveys, I will repeat this until the end of this plan, they are all downloadable on the Plan Charlestown website. We hope that as many people download them as possible so that you can see what your neighbors thought and see what we reacted to, as opposed to just the comments that you hear in a meeting like this. We really got to get into kind of in the weeds feedback that was really helpful and informative through this more in-depth survey process. So all of that is what has informed Interborough's new hybrid scenario. And I should probably mention that, once again, this is iterative. So all of the feedback that we hear tonight from the AG will help to inform changes that are made to the scenarios. And then that scenario will come to the full public at the end of February is our goal. Receive additional public comment, and then be edited again before it makes it into the draft plan, at which point it will get more public feedback and receive additional edits. So it's an incredibly iterative process, and we're hoping that it's honing in on the future for Charlestown's industrial area that the community wants to see. So the other thing I'm going to touch on quickly before I pass the mic to Interborough Partners is the Austin Street parking lots. So this is going to be super brief because this is not a real estate meeting. This is not about the parking lots, but our advisory group is obviously very involved, and so I want to make sure that you're aware of this process so that you can stay involved. The Austin Street parking lots are one of the clearest examples of planning-led development that we're going to see in Charlestown come out of Plan Charlestown. So it falls under our Plan Charlestown umbrella. These are 2 BPDA-owned parking lots that are directly across from Bunker Hill Community College. We have had 2 public meetings about these already, including a visioning session and then a scenarios session where we talked about potential development futures. You'll get to see in our consultant scenarios how this site ties into the larger vision for the neighborhood. In general, what we showed at the last community meeting is very much in line with what Interborough will show, because we knew what direction they were moving, so we were able to also push it in that direction so that they complement each other, they match. But the big thing for this group to know is really relevant, or that's really relevant to you, is the timeline. So on here are the community engagement meetings that we have had and will had for this development RFP that's being written. So the first meeting that we had was in October for visioning and goals. The second one was in December, where we showed some draft scenarios based on that visioning and goals and based on this hybrid scenario that you're about to see. And then the next meeting, right now, it's tentatively scheduled for the first week of March. And that will be when we come back to the community with a draft RFP based on everything that we have heard so far for the community to review and give additional comments. And then we're hoping to have a published RFP by April so that we can time it with some ARPA funding deadlines. So I won't go too much farther into that. And I will, before I pass it off to Interborough, just ask if there are any questions or comments about what I just said. And if not, I'll pass the mic. And you can also hold your questions to the end if you want to see the very exciting hybrid scenario and not dwell on, the boring stuff that I just presented.
Trish, there is one question in the chat about the survey. It's asking, was there 952 submissions or 952 people submitting comments? So I guess the question gets to, were those from unique addresses or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. The surveys were anonymous and there were 9 different topics. So the same person might have submitted a response to our perks survey and then to our density survey, and they would be counted as 2 different submissions, even though it was one person. If the same person submitted twice for one topic, like submitted twice for parks, that would only be counted as one submission. That's just the way that Survey 123, the platform that we used, counts it when we decided to make it anonymous. But yeah, great question. It is why I have to say when I talk about it, it's 952 submissions and not persons. It's a little tricky there. But if that's the only question, I will stop sharing and pass it over to Andrew at Interborough.
I'm gonna
And there,
jump
yeah,
in-
Dan, you
I'm
jump
gonna
in first.
But thanks so much, Trish. And let me just start by saying it's really a pleasure to finally meet you all. To the extent that meeting on Zoom counts as actually meeting people. We've spent so much time poring over the feedback that you've given thus far, all 952 survey responses and all the comments. We feel like we kind of know you all already, but it's nice to put some faces to names and have this chance to get to know each other a little bit. Let's hope we have the chance to meet in person sometime in the near future. Real quick, so my name is Dan Dioka. I'm a principal and co-founder of Interborough Partners. It's been our pleasure to work on Plan Charlestown. Our Interborough is also represented by Andrew Wald, who you'll hear from in a little bit. We've got a really great team. Nelson Nygaard, who's looking at transportation, represented here by Jason. RKG, who's looking at economics, represented here by Janger. Stas, who is looking at open space, represented by Jake and Allison. It's a great team, and I think I speak for all of us when I say it's been a real pleasure to get to know Charlestown through this process. It's really not hard to see why you all take time out of your busy schedules to serve on this committee. Charlestown is obviously a really amazing place to live. It's obviously really important to ensure that it changes in a way that enhances what's great about it, that it becomes an even more amazing place to live. As we see it, that's what y'all are doing here. As consultants, we're always happy to see people who are so dedicated to their community. As is often said, our output, which is this plan, is only going to be as good as the input. So we're really grateful for all the input that you've offered us so far. So we're going to present a scenario that's a kind of best of the two scenarios that you've already seen. And we hope you see yourselves in this scenario and see a future Charlestown that you all can be proud of. So as you know, the scenarios propose new development in what we'll be calling the focus area, the area outside of historic Charlestown. But I just want to start by kind of taking a step back and asking a pretty basic question, which is why, right? Why should we plan for new development in Charlestown at all? Let's say, you're a mayor and, you're committed to building a lot of affordable housing, rightfully, in our opinion. I think you'd probably look at this focus area and think this is a great place to build affordable housing. In fact, there are a few places in Boston like it, places with large publicly owned lots, some of which are vacant and all of which, let's face it, are not living up to their full potential. With good planning and design, here's a place where anyone would want to live, with the excellent transportation connections, the waterfront access, the history, the community, all the other things that make Charlestown great. So yes, if I was the mayor, might want to plan for new development here. If you're an environmentalist, you might want to plan for development here as well, for many of the very same reasons. If the Boston region is going to grow, where better to house people than a place that has excellent transit infrastructure, a place that's walkable. But what matters most is why you might want new development. After all, you live here. So with that, maybe Andrew, you can just bring up the first slide, the picture of Charlestown. And so we have a few thoughts about this. So if you don't plan for new development, it's not going to not happen, right? It's just going to happen in the way that it happens now. It's going to happen haphazardly. You can wish that, things aren't going to change, but things will. And the question is, will they change in a way that, as we said before, enhances what's great about Charlestown, that adds to your quality of life? Or will it happen in a way that, enhances the pockets of a few lucky developers? Second, even if there was no new development, how good would that be? If you go to the next slide, how good is what's in the focus area now? Third, with good planning and design, development is a means to get all the good things that you all rightfully want: parks, retail, affordable housing, climate resiliency. These things can come with new development. In any case, they're not going to come without new development. So for these reasons and some more, we're fairly bullish on Charlestown. We think that we should plan for a decent amount of mixed use, mixed income, amenity rich development that enhances what's there, that adds to your quality of life. So we're going to show you our scenario. And to present that to you, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Andrew.
All right, thanks, Dan. And thank you everybody for being here. I'll start by just looking at a kind of general overview of Charlestown. I'm sure that many of you are very familiar with this area. This map is showing kind of the fabric as it exists today, plus a few additional locations that are maybe not fully complete, but will be. So looking at developments that are in the pipeline. So we know that Charlestown is already changing. But we're looking at, some really important sites, including, some publicly owned land, those Austin Street parking lots, areas around Sullivan Square and other kind of underutilized industrial properties that really could be something more, as Dan talked about. And so we're really excited to be able to think about what those sites could be and how they can build on all of the great conversations and work that you've been doing over the past couple of years. So here's those kind of historic industrial sites highlighted. So there's a kind of patchwork of ownership. The blue sites are more publicly owned. The red sites are privately owned. And then the purple one is the Bunker Hill Community College campus, which is also a potential opportunity site. That's not to focus just on these parts. We know that, there we go. We know that, this plan is for all of Charlestown. And so what we're doing here is looking at ways to preserve the existing character of the historic part of the neighborhood, how to enhance newer neighborhoods that already exist, and how to focus the development and improvement attention on some of these underutilized sites, and really think about what they could be. So at the start of our role in this project, we were given two different scenarios that BPDA has vetted with you through the long listening process and surveying activities that Trish gave the overview for. So scenario one, was kind of focused more on jobs and connections, and scenario two was the housing and play scenario, and they were meant to compare different alternatives for land use, for the streets and mobility connections, the configuration of open space, density, and how these things come together to create kind of a holistic vision for the future of all of Charlestown. And so a lot of these were, the components of these two scenarios were testing out different ways that you could treat, each of those planning areas. And our job was to look through all of the feedback that BPDA collected through their work, and to dig into these two scenarios and understand what is worth keeping, what can we add, and how can we, combine really the best of each of these scenarios. So we'll revisit these kind of scenario 1 and scenario 2 images side by side with some quotes of, taken from the engagement process, and identify, some of the differences between the two scenarios, highlighting the things that we felt were important to keep based on what we've been hearing. And then we'll show you our version, the hybrid version, and how we got there. So starting with, let me think, my screen's a little slow here. Starting with connections. We're dealing with a lot of large industrial sites, the community college campus, areas that don't have existing road networks. And as you know, the historic part of Charlestown has a very dense network of connections. But if you were going to turn the areas kind of outside of that into, walkable, well-connected neighborhoods, well, we have to start from really from scratch. And so scenario 1 and 2, we're looking at different configurations for the road grid. We saw that providing connections across Rutherford was a very popular strategy, very important for integrating this neighborhood in with historic Charlestown. And people seem to be more in favor of, a tighter street grid that provides a lot of options for various modes of transportation. So we started by looking at the kind of overall street network, the main connectors for all of Charlestown, and proposed a new network for the kind of industrial areas around the outside, focusing on, creating at least, a main street that can kind of serve as the new spine for this kind of Hood Park and Bunker Hill Community College location, with smaller connector streets that are a little bit more like the neighborhood streets that, are quieter, more walkable. And then thinking about how those tie into the existing street grid and connect all the way across Charlestown, so that you should be able to get from the waterfront to this new kind of western part of Charlestown, and feel like it was a natural, just organic flow, like it was always part of the neighborhood. Looking at shuttles and buses as another means of connecting the neighborhood. This, it was pretty clear from the survey feedback that, the scenario 1 shuttle routes shown here was much more favored in the neighborhood. So here you can see the Charlestown shuttle routes, plus a couple of other potential bus routes that are in the works. And I think that these may be subject to adjustments in the future, but this is how they fit into the neighborhood now, and connect via Rutherford up to the existing train stations, and tie in the kind of new and the old parts of Charlestown. Also looking at bike connections. This is something that's a little bit more polarized. If you ride a bike, you tend to be for bike connections, and if you don't, it's not a high priority. We think that it's important to have modes or routes for all modes throughout this neighborhood. So bike networks are a big part of the focus areas. And we'll get into how they tie into the open space network a little bit later on, but you can see that there's a pretty robust network of bike lanes, and both on and off street bike routes throughout the grow area. Looking at open space, Scenario 1 and 2 really differed in their approaches to open space and parks. So in a nutshell, Scenario 1 used a very linear approach, using parks and open space almost as another form of connectivity, whereas Scenario 2 focused on larger, more consolidated open spaces, and with a particular emphasis on providing amenities like sports fields or other places where you could gather and hold an event, or traditional parks. This again, the community preference was very clear. People really favored consolidated open spaces, large parks. Addressed a need for more athletics fields, more soccer fields, citing that this is a family-friendly neighborhood, a dog-friendly neighborhood. People play a lot of sports, and the existing facilities are just at capacity. And so we took that to heart, but also paid attention to the comments that that really did value the role of linear connectors, greenways, trails. So we do have a little bit of both. So here you can see the existing open space network. And when this loads, let me go back. And here are the proposed open spaces in dark green around the outside. And so you can see that there's a combination of both very large parks of different sizes and different characters, which we'll discuss in a little bit. And then they're all connected by a green network of continuous greenways. So this is a pretty large increase in open space compared to scenarios 1 and 2. So we're calculating about 25 acres of new open space, as opposed to 9 and 13 respectively for scenario 1 and 2. Sorry about the slide skipping here. So we really want to conceptualize these new parks and the new greenways as fitting into a large green loop that ties together all of Charlestown. There's a lot of great parks and open spaces already in Charlestown. We want to make sure that that those spaces are well connected, and that it's easy to flow from one space to another from anywhere in the neighborhood. So if you were to connect all of these spaces, it would be more than 3 miles of connected parkland, which we think would be a really great asset. And so looking at the Green Boulevard, so this is kind of the spine. We're taking advantage of the ability to create a new road network on this formerly industrial and campus driven area. So we can make room for a kind of green boulevard along with new road connections, which is not a luxury that a lot of neighborhoods have. So this is a green boulevard that connects both of the existing transit stops and a lot of new potential development, as well as large parks, both new and existing. Then focusing on large parks. So there are really 3 that we're adding: 1 in Sullivan Square, 1 on the waterfront, and 1 in the heart of the kind of West Charlestown. Not an official name, but the west part of Charlestown. And so we think that through these parks, they can serve kind of different needs. They're different shapes. They have different character, whether they're kind of inland or surrounded by new development, or on the waterfront, or kind of in the center of everything in Sullivan Square. And so we imagine these parks complementing the existing suite of open spaces and recreational facilities that Charlestown has. But this one large park that we're calling out here, we think is a good opportunity to add soccer fields or other athletic facilities that that people want, and also replacing some of the existing athletics facilities that that the community college has in roughly the same location. Okay, and then we're also looking at looking at the waterfront. So with development on the Medford side of Charlestown, we have to look at creating kind of a waterfront buffer, and this is another opportunity to create a really nice open space that people can enjoy, and really bringing back the waterfront that wasn't necessarily accessible as kind of in its industrial form. Okay, and then the smallest level, we're looking at neighborhood parks. And then as we move into the kind of next stages and fine tune the urban design guidelines, can start looking at even smaller kind of residual open spaces that are part of individual development sites. So we're really looking at a wide variety of open space types here, from very large to very small, and trying to find ways to connect them all to each other and existing parks. Okay, looking at land use next. So scenario 1 and 2 also differed a lot. They offered two pretty different outcomes for land use. So scenario 1, with the focus on job creation, had a lot more dedicated commercial space. So that's office, lab space, and more clearly defined zones throughout. Scenario 2, with more of an emphasis on housing, had a lot more mixed use, and was it does include a little bit of dedicated commercial, but not nearly as much as in scenario 1. So I think here again, this was probably the most clear result of everything that we saw from the surveys. People strongly preferred scenario 2, the mixed use scenario. And we agreed. And so scenario 3, the hybrid scenario, it does keep a little bit of that higher density commercial, dedicated office and lab space along the freeway. But a lot of the other, larger scale developments are really looking at mixed use. And then where newer developments but the historic parts of Charlestown, there's more of a transition to residential only. So we can kind of break down the different zones here, and I'll point out that we are assuming that ground floor retail is an option throughout. So we are assuming that if it doesn't happen everywhere, it will happen kind of regardless of whether we're calling a building a residential or a commercial or something else. So a little under a fifth of our hybrid scenario is dedicated solely to residential, mostly where the focus areas meet existing residential areas. The Austin Street parking lots are also being highlighted for housing. Then the mixed use, so this is both residential and some form of office or other commercial, like larger commercial. This makes up a little over half of the focus area, what we're proposing. So this is a little bit different style than some of the other mixed use areas that are in historic Charlestown. This would be a little bit higher density, and with a focus on both housing and more office typologies, again with retail on the ground floor. So that's kind of the core of the hybrid scenario. And then new office and lab space, mostly located along the freeway, and that's kind of acting as a buffer. A lot of people pointed out that living next to a freeway or enjoying a park next to the freeway is not the most appealing idea. And so if we can kind of put some of these larger office buildings or lab buildings with, kind of bulkier forms, then maybe we can kind of mediate between the kind of infrastructure of the highway and the train lines and the surrounding neighborhood, while creating a place for jobs that can support both residential development and contribute to the other commercial spaces. And then finally, industrial, we're not proposing any new industrial, but we are preserving some that already exists, mostly along the waterfront on the kind of MBTA property up here. Industrial does have a place in Charlestown. It would still make up, about 13% of the overall focus area, but most of this formerly industrial land is getting shifted into more of a neighborhood feel. Okay. And then we're looking at density. So not just what is the development used for, but how big is it and how intense can it get? So scenario 1 used a kind of banded approach. So again, this is dealing with the fact that you have a large, busy, elevated highway that flanks the edge of Charlestown. So the idea in scenario 1 was to use that higher density development to block the highway and create a buffer that makes basically shields the rest of the neighborhood from that noise and pollution. And then density would gradually step down as you get towards the less dense historic neighborhood. Scenario 2 was pretty much medium density all the way around. Nothing, should say the red in scenario 1 is high density, orange is medium density, and yellow is low. So you can see that in scenario 2, there's no high density at all, and everything is kind of in the medium to low range. So as far as density goes, I mean, I think really where is the key. From BPDA surveys, it's pretty clear that people supported higher density development on the Bunker Hill Community College site and closer to the freeway. Did not support high density development like along the riverfront. A little bit ambivalent, in areas that are, touching other, existing neighborhoods. Again, higher density was okay in Sullivan Square. And then people seem to favor kind of medium density around the Austin Street parking lots, which is much closer to the existing neighborhoods of Charlestown. You can see these are the examples that were included with the survey. So as reference points for what low, medium, and high means in this context. So we took that to heart. So we really wanted to focus on lower density developments anywhere where new development would touch historic Charlestown. So everything is basically there was a comment about acknowledging that the Schrafts building is there, and there's some other taller historic or legacy buildings in historic Charlestown. Those are topping out at about 100 or give or take 100 feet. So we tried to keep new development that would be adjacent to existing neighborhoods in that range. So everything here is an FAR of 2 or 3, and trying to keep things 100 feet or less, especially where there's no buffer between historic and new development. Things get a little bit taller along Rutherford Avenue, where that wide road does create a little bit of a separation. Then looking at medium density. So this is going up to an FAR of 4 and 150 feet. So this is kind of that middle zone. So you can see that it's pretty separate from any existing neighborhood fabric. So this should not really impact the feel of historic Charlestown. It's all buffered behind lower density and lower height development. And then the highest density is pushed along the freeway. So remember, this is mixed use and dedicated commercial space. These are building typologies that benefit from having a little extra height, and we're using this to block noise and pollution and the sight lines for the freeway, especially because, as you'll recall, we've got a proposal for large parks, neighborhood parks, this greenway paralleling the freeway, and so we want to make sure that there's a decent buffer and that those green spaces are not overwhelmed by traffic noise. Okay, so here's a kind of oversimplified diagram of what those heights look like. So from the highest end, blocking the freeway, would be like a lab building. The mixed use, that's about 12 down to 5 stories would be kind of at the lower end, and then lower density would be in the kind of 3 to 5 story range to match with the existing heights of historic Charlestown. So really going from kind of shielding the louder, more intense parts of the planning area, and transitioning gently down into the purely residential areas. So here you can see a kind of bird's eye view that puts it all together. The colors correspond to the land uses. So yellow is all residential, orange is mixed use, and red is commercial, and purple is the industrial that exists. So what are our next steps here? We know that we want to present this to the public. What we're showing you today is kind of walking you through the how we got to this hybrid scenario. So it's a lot of kind of breaking it down, looking at things in plan, and going through the comments from the previous engagement. But we think that in order to show this to the public, we want to really put people into these neighborhoods, especially because a lot of these industrial spaces are not really places that that you spend time in. So how do you get a frame of reference for how this kind of new part of Charlestown would feel? So we are working on making a series of illustrations, such as this one on the waterfront, or here looking at that new large park and soccer field on the Bunker Hill Community College location, to kind of give people a sense of okay, what would these spaces really be like? Are the buildings feeling comfortable? Is there enough green space? Is there an opportunity for neighborhood life? And we want to put this all together into a kind of graphic novel as the kind of public facing piece. And so we would use the kind of images that I've just flashed on the screen to piece together a kind of narrative. And we've drafted a couple of kind of sample storylines here. One, talking about how a current resident of historic Charlestown would experience these new neighborhoods, and what these kind of newer areas would bring to someone who already lives in Charlestown. And then another story focusing on a new resident who maybe doesn't live in Charlestown today, but would be attracted to live in a place like this, and why it's appealing to both. Before we get there, though, we need to really put this new scenario through the ringer. We need to evaluate it more carefully. So as I've walked you through this scenario, it's based on the two scenarios that BPDA has been developing, and a lot of public comment. So we're kind of understanding what the neighborhood priorities are. We've landed on a solution that we think addresses those issues, but we do need to take a closer look at how this fits into the larger transportation picture for the region, how this would fit into the existing real estate market, and how would this really work. So we're in that testing phase now. I can pass the mic to both Nelson Nygaard and RKG just to talk a little bit about what they're doing to evaluate this scenario. And then, we'll take their feedback and refine this before it would go out to the public. So maybe Nelson Nygaard can start and just say a few words about the kind of analysis that you're doing, and how this can inform the next iteration of this.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. And good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Navsam with Nelson Nygaard. As Andrew stated, the Nelson Nygaard team is supporting Plan Charlestown by conducting some high-level transportation modeling work. I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So we're currently developing a high-level transportation model, and the goal of this model is essentially to identify pinch points or other areas of transportation interest or concern related to the proposed scenario 3, which Andrew has just shared tonight. This model will assess capacity pinch points in both the roadway and the transit networks. We are concerned, again, with all forms of transportation entering and traveling within the neighborhood. And we'll also be identifying desire lines for travel between the project area and other neighborhoods in the Boston region, again, taking a little bit more of that regional perspective. We plan to use the findings from this modeling exercise to continue to refine scenario 3 in terms of both land use mix and potentially overall density as well. A few other things about the work that we're doing. Our model will incorporate the latest information regarding the future of Orange Line, commuter rail, and bus service in the area, while also accounting for the possibility of potential new road lengths or changes to existing roadway configurations. Again, our goal here is really to vet both the total amount of development as well as that land use mix, and understand that future roadway and transit networks can really accommodate what is being proposed. Once we identify those potential pinch points, that's when we can start to identify either tweaks to the current scenario, including shifting that land use mix and volume, or potential improvements to both the roadway and transit networks, which would help to mitigate any future impacts. This could potentially include policy recommendations as well. So we are taking a very holistic approach. We're also trying to be mindful of the fact that our regional models typically are relying on a lot of assumptions which were developed prior to 2020. So we are working to calibrate our model to reflect some of the changes in commuting behavior, which have resulted from increased working from home in the wake of pandemic. That's just one example of the type of calibration that we're undertaking. So happy to answer questions related to the work that we're doing as we get deeper into the meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And Eric and Jahangir from RKG.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Halverson. I'm with RKG Associates, and we're doing the financial analysis as part of the scenario development. We're on board to kind of tackle two primary questions The first is if zoning and density levels or development levels are set through a scenario planning and zoning is set through a future plan, what is the value that could potentially be derived from tweaking the zoning or changing the zoning, say from what it is today to something different that might follow the future scenario? So for example, if the zoning today, say only allows an industrial building or something of very low scale, and the zoning was changed to something like what Andrew was talking about in some of the scenarios, whether that be a 50-foot building or a 350-foot building, we want to calculate, is there additional value that comes to a property owner or more likely to a developer that could then sort of be siphoned off and given to the community in sort of as an exchange for community benefits like funding open spaces, streetscape, plazas, maybe additional affordable housing on top of what's being sort of envisioned today. So we're going to try to quantify what that dollar value is from any sort of added development potential from the scenarios. The second component is more around publicly owned land and trying to see through a development finance exercise if land was set at a very low cost or maybe no cost and offered sort of like what the RFP process is with Bunker Hill. Is there any value that could be sort of again siphoned off from offering land at a very low cost in exchange for public benefits? So what we want to do is essentially calculate if what is the fair market value for land, how much is that worth, and what impact does that have on development finance? If you remove the land cost, is there an added benefit that again can be siphoned off and turned into public benefit? So we hope to do those two tasks and quantify what that public benefit could potentially be with the scenarios.
Thanks. So yeah, our next steps, we're going to take the analysis that that Nelson Nygaard and RKG do, feedback from this group, to kind of identify areas where we can refine scenario 3, and we'll start working on an updated version that responds to those findings and feedback to go public. And then our next step after that is once we've got the kind of overall scenario pretty well defined, we'll start to dive a little bit deeper into finer grained urban design guidelines and working with STOS especially to kind of talk about like, how does this meet the ground, and what are those open spaces like? What are the green spaces like? Are there requirements that we're going to ask of developers to make sure that those private sites are still welcoming to the public and contributing to the overall health and resilience of the neighborhood. So
thanks, Andrew.
Yeah,
go ahead, Trish.
I just want to add that for the AG members on this call, we don't expect you to give all of your comments tonight. And we also have some AG members that weren't able to make it that Jay and I are meeting with later this week. So we'd really like to receive all of your comments within the next week so that Interborough has time to make changes to their scenario before the public release. So Jay will email out it will also be on our website, but Jay will email out the slides that Andrew and Dan have shared tonight, and then you can email us with any comments that you have, and Jay will send reminders also about our intended deadline. So don't feel like you have to say or get all of your thoughts out tonight. You have additional time because we know that was a lot of information.
It was a lot of information. That was very helpful, Trish. So I think we can open it up to a little bit of a discussion. We walked through a lot of information tonight, and there will become a point where we present this information to the community in late February, like Trish mentioned. And we're really interested in hearing from advisory group members on ways to, are there any edits or updates or revisions we can make to the presentation that we just showed you that make it a bit more intuitive or comprehensive, or, are there engagement or any events or engagement strategies that you want us to look to? That's kind of the topic of discussion that we want to have tonight. Nancy, you asked about the graphic novel and the timing of that. The intent is, yes, we would release this in late February, have the graphic novel to accompany that, and ensure that we're out in the community and collecting feedback and input on what we just showed. So I think we're ready to kind of start talking about that a little bit. I don't know if Nancy, you want to kind of ask another question, or if any other advisory group members want to get us going here. Trish, thank you for putting that in the chat. So we actually just received an update from the Transportation Department this morning on an update on the Rutherford Ave and Sullivan Square design. So that's in the chat. It's also on BTD, the Transportation Department's website. So it's an update on the status of Rutherford Ave.
How do we do this?
Jay, I think your audio cut out for a second. I think your audio is still cut out.
Joining. Can you hear me?
There we go. You just cut back in.
Sorry.
You might want to go back like a minute or two into your what you were saying.
I just was acknowledging that Trish, put the Transportation Department update in the chat. I can put it in there again. Sean Breen from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, thank you for joining. Megan Bragg from Representative Danny Ryan's office, thank you for joining. Nancy, you can raise your hand by either clicking the participants tab, or there should be a raise hand button at the bottom, but feel free to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. This is Nancy Johnson. I had a quick, one comment and a quick question about the Flatley parcels, the 3 Flatley parcels along the Mystic River. I saw that there was one of the 3 large parks or open spaces is planned there. Is this something that they have agreed to? And then the second piece is, I guess we'll have to wait for the traffic analysis, but my understanding was we weren't even certain that with a 2.0 FAR everywhere, if people developed as right, that we had sufficient infrastructure to handle those people. So when I see an FAR of 6, I'm very concerned. I know that's along the highway, but still it's a little concerning that something's going to be 200 feet over the expressway. And so I'm just wondering, I know that they have older data, but there are going to be more people coming into the area and coming to those jobs. So I'm just wondering what where's the balance between approving something like that and the reality that it will take us 30 to 40 years to put new infrastructure in. And then I just not to take too much more time. So one is, has Flatley agreed to that park, or is that just something that's sort of a proposal? And then I also think of that, especially 425 Medford and the parking lots right next to it, that really feels like it's part of the historic peninsula rather than industrial area. It's, right, it abuts right against the more residential areas. And I just think that should have lower density and lower building heights than are being proposed because of that. I think it's almost like a hybrid area. It's not like the industrial areas in the industrial park along the highway. It's really much more like, it's because it's right adjacent to the neighborhoods. I'd like to see the building heights respect that. So those are my thoughts and questions.
Thanks, Nancy. Trish, you want to take a first step then?
Yeah, I'll tackle what 425 has agreed to. The park that Interboro's hybrid scenario shows on their land is extremely close to where we have been able to already push them on what they're calling Olmsted Way. So we're actually really excited about that, the fact that our last version of the scenarios helped us to get here. And we're hoping to continue that conversation about widening their open space. That being said, they are already proposing, and I don't want to go to bat for a developer. That's really, I want to go to bat for the community, but they are already proposing 9.5 acres of really nice green open space. So they're, and that's a key part of their proposal as well. They are really excited about it. So we believe that it will end up being in the project. The other thing that makes 425 Medford hard from a density and height perspective, that we struggle with, is that they're already allowed 2 FAR by zoning. So interborough scenario only gives them 2 FAR. It doesn't upzone them at all. And we're just trying to figure out, with all of that open space, if they get the 2 FAR, it pushes them up into the 120, 130 foot range at minimum. And we're still trying to figure out how to make those two things work together, because they have so many expensive resilience improvements that they have to make in order for their property to be viable. It's such a hard project, and I don't want to minimize the fact that it is also up against this residential fabric that is so important and it needs to respect. So I think it's an ongoing conversation with the developer. But Andrew, was there any part of Nancy's questions that you wanted to tackle?
Yeah, I guess about the density. I mean, at the high end of the proposal, it is something that, reading through all of the past comments, we know that it's a concern, and I've seen it popping up in the chat here that traffic is a real concern, and I think that the ways that we're trying to locate those highest density areas, closest to existing transit and future transit lines, and then using greenways to even further connect those. The hope is that those can really be basically minimizing the amount of automobile traffic as much as possible.
When I talk about infrastructure, I'm sort of including how
Mhm.
people move in different ways, whether it's shuttle buses and the T and the Orange Line. Maybe they're going to get there, but they kind of struggle with regular capacity. And even with our 3-month or 1-month shutdown or whatever in the new cars, so just being near transit is not the answer. And I keep hearing that. But if there isn't capacity on transit and the bus lines and rapid transit and shuttles, it's not going to work. And I don't see those answers. I'd like to see, and I think other people have expressed this over and over through this process, we really want to see the policies that are going to get us to a place where we could have that level of density, if that's what you're actually going to propose. And I think where we were, my understanding was that if everyone currently developed a 2.0 FAR, it would exceed what people think we had available to transit right now. And if it's going to take us 20, 30 years to increase capacity in all forms of transit to get people either from New Hampshire into Charlestown or Boston, or people arriving on the T from the Orange Line or the Blue Line, or the Green Line, if that capacity isn't there, then none of this makes sense, right? So if we can't do 2.0 average over everything, how are we doing what you're proposing? And what is the average FAR over all the industrial area that you're proposing? Like, if you had to average the space over what you're proposing volume wise, would it be like a 3 FAR overall? How many gross square feet?
Sure. The average FAR question, I will have to run a calculation to figure out that we don't have a kind of uniform average for this. So that's a good question. I'll look into that. I think one of the capacity issues, or addressing the capacity issues, one thing that we're doing today is looking at what would the impact of this type of scenario be? And I think that the results of that analysis will kind of tell us, what direction we need to go. Is it indeed too much development? Are there, kind of problem spots that are localized that could be addressed in other ways? Are there other solutions that we have at our disposal to kind of, address those issues moving forward? I think, you're also mentioning, the time it takes to upgrade infrastructure. It also takes time to build, a lot of these, these projects. I mean, we're talking about a very large development area, and not all of this will happen overnight. And so I think that's also something to think about, is how does this play out over time? And as demand for transportation or infrastructure increases, can those improvements kind of incrementally keep up with the development? But those are things that we're looking into more at this stage. Now that we have a clear scenario, we can poke at it and kind of see where it stands up and where we need to go back to the drawing board.
Thanks, Andrew.
I think the other thing to build on that is, and this is something that we always go back to and Dan mentioned at the beginning, is that the opposite of a planned Charlestown scenario isn't no development in this area. The opposite is continuing to spot zone and handle project by project, which ends up often allowing probably more density than what this shows. And, will continue for the next 20 to 30 years as projects in this area continue to be proposed, at which point none of us will still be at the BPDA in these roles, but the plan, if we can have a consolidated what response would be still referred to. So the hope is that we're somewhere in between what, definitely thinking about the transit capacity, but also not ignoring what developers are going to come in at and say is feasible, and then we have to push back on them with. So the scenario is a tool to do that.
Yeah,
Great
I'm
point,
not
Trish.
proposing no plan.
Yeah, of course, Nancy.
I'm just saying, because I believe that we need a plan. I'm just wondering, and maybe it's creative ways of coming at when development is happening, because we just got that whole slew of development that came in, 2019 through 2021, and it's all pending and kind of waiting for this. And now there's even more that's sort of being proposed through these scenarios. So, is it zoning, but the zoning it phases in over time? Because how are you going to line those developers up for when they're going to develop? Because we have a lot of projects that keep saying they were ready to build in 2021, right? Or 2022. So I'll end my comments here, but that's just sort of what I'm worried about.
Thanks, Nancy. Joanne, then Amanda, then Shannon.
Hi. It's a lot of information. It's overwhelming, but I get worried when you characterize this as having listened to the community, because I guess it feels like a lot of extrapolation from people's kind of thinking about something. And now we're talking about FAR of 6. I don't remember seeing that on seeing that anywhere, ever discussed anywhere. And I'm looking at and trying to see where One Mystic is. And it seems to me that One Mystic is FAR 6, which is not too far off from what they proposed. And when we look at these projects on an individual basis, there were good reasons for not going that high. So I'm afraid that with this kind of a broader, and I understand you're looking at things in a more global way, but when you bring it down to the individual projects, is that really what should be there? And back to something Nancy alluded to, and I think in some of the chat, is how many square feet of development does this add up to? Because I think of when I read about Everett, what they want to do, looking at Medford, what they're talking about doing, all of that impacts this. It's upstream on the orange line. If they were all using transit as justifying their density, how how many cars could there possibly be on the Orange Line that would open up then and allow people in the Charlestown area to get on? So I'm just concerned that this is, I know it's future, and I know if nothing's going to get built overnight, but once you've set these rules, these zoning new guidelines, they never get undone. We're setting up something at maximums that I'm afraid the area cannot handle. And I think we're doing all of this before you finish the transportation analysis. You're proposing anything without that? That was to me, from the day one, that's what we talked about, that we needed to start the planning based on real information. And now it just feels like I know you want to get this done, and we've been taking more than 3 years, is it 4 years now to get here? But I feel like you're putting the horse before, the cart before the horse here. So I'm overwhelmed because it's hard to be specific on this stuff, except a couple of little things I've mentioned. But I feel like you're going to say this is what the community has agreed to. And I don't feel that that is true, at least at this stage, and not what you've proposed or putting out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. We're sorry you feel a little bit overwhelmed. It is a lot of information. I understand why you are overwhelmed. Don't feel like you need, I don't feel like you need to get us all of your comments this evening. So take your time to review it, digest it, and follow up with us with any additional questions, comments, or concerns that you have. Trish, do you want to talk a little bit about what she asked? Do we know the square footage or anything? Do we follow up with that?
That would definitely be a question for Interborough. The comment about the order of operations, the transit capacity analysis happening now, we had to have a hybrid scenario to be analyzed in order to do the transit capacity analysis. We're trying to expedite things, which is why you're seeing this before we have those answers, so that we can get that information, get your comments, and roll them all into changes before this goes to the full public. I apologize if it feels out of order. We're really trying to do this as fast as possible, but I also do obviously want to do this responsibly. So there are 2 more moments when the scenarios will be updated. So this is not the last pass at them, and the transit capacity analysis will have the opportunity to impact them, and we will have additional meetings with this AG about the findings of that analysis. But also, I understand that it's frustrating because we're all living it. And yeah, I would pass to Andrew if he has anything to add.
Sure. I think this scenario that we've looked at today is still kind of a test case. That we've put this together based on all of the material that has been produced, and the conversations that we have access to. And it's basically trying to put all the pieces together into one thing that we can look at through a variety of lenses. And the purpose of doing that is, so that, we know where to take it next. And so I think that this current phase is a really important part of the process. The scenario that we're showing, we have visualized it in a certain way, but there's, no guarantee that that's exactly how it would look, or that the developments would fully get built out to this extent. And so we're kind of setting like the maximum test case to see where we land, and then we can respond to that.
Thank you, Andrew. And Trish.
And Jay, I can just add to that.
Yeah.
Jim Fitzgerald, BPDA Transportation Planning. I think as Trish said, we kind of need a place to start to do our transportation analysis, which, we need to at least get a comfort level of range of build out and uses from the community before we kind of spend a lot of resources doing a lot of in-depth analysis. So, I think our next step, if we get to a certain level of kind of general comfort of the general vision, we then will be doing our full, multimodal transportation analysis as Jason kind of outlined, and all kind of the assumptions that went into that, the network assumptions, all those things. I think we'll walk everyone through. We'll walk everyone through that analysis, and we'll see where, like we said, things might need to change as far as density or mix of uses, which I think, as most folks know, have a pretty big impact on the functionality of the transportation network. So we'll get into that work. That's kind of the next step, but we kind of needed to at least have a general sense of where to start as far as a future condition to analyze. So
Thanks, Jim. Super helpful. Amanda.
Thanks, Jason. I am also overwhelmed. It looks like a lot of development, which I'm going to refrain from sort of making a judgment call on that at the moment. But I have a couple of sort of thoughts. I would really like to understand what goes into the thought process of determining the FAR for the different areas. Is there data, some sort of methodology that that sort of allows you to kind of come up with that and where to place that? I mean, I understand where to place it against the highways is sort of the overall idea, but like why 4 versus 6, why 3 versus 2, like that sort of overall methodology is my first part of my question. And second is, the community is pretty divided on development. I think there's a lot of people that support, reasonable development and responsible development and something sort of, again, within reason. And then there are a lot of people that don't want development or maybe want a little bit of development, but probably not to the extent that you're showing. So I think that it's going to be a hard sell to the public. And I would really, for me, I would really want to see like concrete plans for how mass transit is going to support this type of development, because again, cart before the horse, like Joanna's saying, but I'm sure it could probably work with some big improvements to mass transit, but based on our experience with the bridge, our experience with Rutherford Avenue, we've been planning Rutherford Avenue for, 20 years, and it's still probably a decade away. So I feel like in order to even really kind of be considering this size of development, we need to be planning for all of those improvements now. And we're not even close to that. My third part is, you mentioned that you were going to do some of the sort of data analysis around impacts for traffic. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact language, but I'd like to know the basis of how many square feet that is, because you've got to be able to, you should have those numbers in order to do that traffic analysis. So what are those numbers? What is the square footage that we're looking at across, all of these different FARs and building heights, things like that? How many, do you have an idea of how many units of housing there are? Because all of that I know goes into your calculations for traffic analysis. So I feel like that's a big miss that we're not seeing that. And I feel like you should have those numbers in order to do all of those analysis and then also be able to inform us on what we're looking at. I mean, I would love to know are we looking at basically duplicating, what we have in Charlestown now in terms of people and square footage? Is this 2x, existing Charlestown? Is this 6x Charlestown? I think that would be really helpful to help us get our heads around what we're looking at.
Thanks, Amanda. Trish, you want to
Yeah,
take it?
I actually think Eric from RKG would be the best suited to answer the question about the FARs, because their team is doing the financial feasibility analysis, essentially trying to determine how much density do we need to add to Charlestown in order to get the community benefits that we're also showing in the plan, because that's what's driving the level of density that we're showing. We're trying to figure out what is basically the lowest density that we can get to get the most for the neighborhood. And he can talk about that analysis. And then I think that I would pass it to Andrew to give some ballpark numbers of magnitude in terms of what their build out is. But I would caveat that because of the amount of mixed use shown in the proposal, about 50% of the area is shown as mixed use. If it all goes office, that drastically changes the number of residential units. So it means that the range of residential units is very large, like large enough that when we try to tell you how many people that is that live versus work, it's obviously usable for the transportation capacity analysis because they can look at both uses and both data points. But I feel like to a member of Charlestown, it feels like too big a range to be helpful. But yeah, so maybe RKG first, Eric, and then Andrew.
Sure, Trish, I'll take a few seconds. So for the FAR question, the back and forth with Interborough is really around, if we're able to drive some additional FAR and height where it's appropriate in some of those locations. The thought is that we might be able to then drive additional value, which could potentially be captured and then reinvested back into the neighborhood for community benefits that the neighborhood, wants to see there. In our experience elsewhere in the city and doing some work recently with modeling the financial feasibility of development for the mayor's office of housing, we learned that development, not surprising probably to many of you, is very expensive, especially right now as construction costs continue to creep up. And it's pushing a lot of development into the level of just being not feasible. So what we want to try to understand is at what level is it feasible? And then if it's reasonable to go above that level, how much of that benefit could potentially be captured? So what we're doing is taking Interborough's FAR numbers and trying to figure out, does 6 make sense? Does 3 make sense? Sort of at what level can we start to gain those community benefits? And do they start to multiply the higher that we go to drive more benefits? So that's just the way that we're using FAR on the financing side. And I'm sure Andrew could talk about how they actually came up with those numbers and where they're appropriate.
Wait, can I just ask a clarifying question? So are you saying that it's not financially feasible to build at 2.0 FAR, and so that's why we have to do 4, 5, 6?
I don't have the answer for you today, but that's what we're working on to try to figure that out.
Okay, I'm just confused because we do have some areas that are at FAR 2.0. So why do they work in one area but not in another?
I'd have to look at those specifically to see why. Some are they only multifamily residential projects on their own, or are they a combination of different uses?
I'm not sure it's what's proposed in these scenarios. So in these scenarios, you have, areas that are 2.0, areas that are 3, areas that are 4, areas that are 6. So your scenarios have defined that. So that's why I'm asking, like, why is there so much difference when you're saying that it might not be financially feasible to build at lower FARs?
Most of the 2 FAR residential development that's proposed, or all of it, is actually on larger parcels where there are other uses. Like Bunker Hill Community College has a 2 FAR area near Rutherford. It's financially feasible because there are other higher FAR uses on that same site. Same thing with the area around 40 Roland and some other smaller parcels. So they're more like larger mixed use projects, even if there are single residential buildings on the sites.
Right. I mean, some of the things that are driving, our thinking is, what is the context like? If it's next to an area that's already built out and is already, sticking to a 2 FAR, we're not going to put a 6 area right next to that. Other times we're thinking about, especially along the freeway, of a particular type of a scale of building. If a goal is to buffer the freeway, we're also thinking about, use typologies and like what is feasible for, say, an office building, versus, say, like a low density housing project. So we're thinking about, kind of, what is the type of use we'd like to encourage? What's the scale of development that we'd like to encourage? If it's, just say comparing a higher or a lower density residential development, both are residential projects, but maybe in one area we want to encourage a certain type of character. So we use FAR as one way to get at that. Yeah, I mean, another is thinking about, just kind of the configuration of the lots and looking at, if someone were to max out, this development site at, a certain FAR, what would that building look like? Does that seem appropriate? Does it seem appropriate for the type of use? Does it seem appropriate for the neighbors? And, are there ways that we could, try to, leverage that in order to get, say, more, more open space on that site? If, we allow a taller, skinnier building, then maybe you could get more on the ground, or, things like that. So there are a lot of, a lot of potential drivers. So
more like land use planning principles rather than circulation and infrastructure.
Right. I mean, I think that, Interborough is coming at it from an urban design perspective and looking at the, kind of the whole form of Charlestown. But we rely on our team to now, check that and say, well, from a transportation planning standpoint, does this make sense? And from, a financial standpoint, does this make sense? So there are a lot of different factors, and I think, like folks have been saying, we have to start somewhere, and have a scenario that is well developed and that we can kind of put through the ringer, and after that, then we can see, like, okay, where are the levers that we can pull in order to make everything work. So
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Andrew. Shannon.
Hi, Shannon Fitzgerald. I'm with the Charlestown Mothers Association. I just had a couple of things. I'm gonna just go ahead and go on the record and echo everything that Amanda and others have said, just about concerns about transportation, and just also want to just make a little caveat that it seems a little misleading to say, like, that the survey results were that a certain percentage preferred density here over there, when the question wasn't whether or not you want density, but if you are going to be forced to have density, where would you prefer it to be, which feels a little different to me. So it's not like everyone's dying for density in that area. It's more like, and the same goes in terms of, like, blocking the highway. Like, that doesn't seem a compelling enough reason to have those buildings in that place at that height. I did have a question about, well, one piece of feedback as you move towards making your graphic design type of novel thing. It looks like, according to Jason, it might just be a mistake that looks like there's buildings on top of the Charlestown High School fields, and just if you want to clean that up before sending it out, but because people will definitely react to that. And then the only other thing that I was wondering about that I wanted to ask is, in your, like, hypothetical scenario, there was sort of a throwaway about taking little Timmy over to his new elementary school. When we're thinking about things like a new elementary school, which is very much something that this town could use, and there's also an active search happening for a community center, where does that fit in to something like this? I mean, I know these are all, like, hypothetical buildings with hypothetical landlords, but if the city is going to do something like that, is that something that can be more solidly planned for? For instance, if you're going to have soccer fields over there, perhaps if we are looking, if the town, the city are looking to put in a new community center, would it make sense to put it near that soccer field? You know what I mean? Like, how does that, where would that fall in this whole process?
Can I answer those, Jay?
Yeah.
Okay. First, I do want to clarify the surveys that we asked about density asked about different geographies, and someone could have ranked low density for all of them. And in fact, a handful of people did. Some areas people chose to rank high density. So it wasn't that you had to place density and high density anywhere. But I do hear the concern that like maybe you felt like you needed to put it somewhere. Maybe you had to pick. But the hope was that people would answer how they truly felt. The question about basically what you're asking about is capital projects and like facilities that are by other departments that are not the BPDA, that are run by the city, like BCYF and BPS. The answer to those two are different. BCYF doing the community center search, we've been in discussion with them about this. They feel like they're on a faster timeline than development in Rutherford, in the Rutherford Ave corridor is. They're not really interested in the new development sites that could happen in that area because the timeline isn't the next 5 years, the timeline is the next 30, and they want somewhere now. So we've had a lot of discussions because I'm one of the people that they go to when they suggest sites because I'm also familiar with the neighborhood and we talk about what is that site used for today, like obviously the Clarity Pool, concerning option, like we should discuss this. So their search is on a different timeline, and we've talked also about if that community center should go at the Austin Street parking lots. Same thing. They've said that they're on a faster timeline than the development of the Austin Street parking lots would happen. But we're very open to that conversation, and if they came back to us and they were like, actually, we need a new development parcel for this or a project that this is community mitigation for, we would try to figure out how to accommodate that. The plan itself is not going to be so specific that the bottom floor of this building is going to be a grocery store and the bottom floor of that building is going to be community center. So it would outline a general area that community uses could happen. And then as projects come in, our Article 80 process continues. And so you get another chance to, you know, comment on those projects, ask for the things that you want. BCUIF gets another crack at it to be like, actually, this is the perfect development for us to partner with. You know, maybe the Bunker Hill Community College site, if they redevelop it, is where it should go. So those are all conversations that will continue to happen, and this planning process is not the end of them. The question about the schools is difficult because the planning agency does not plan for schools. BPS plans for them on their own. What we do is we hand them our square footage projections, which Andrew's going to give you a ballpark for after I stop talking, I hope. But we hand them an estimated square footage number and that broad range of unit estimates, and we say, this is how many kids might end up in here. And they have their own analysis team that double checks how many kids they think are going to end up in there. And then they say, based on this magnitude, do we need to add another classroom to each grade, or do we need to add another school? And so Jay and I actually met with BPS last week, and they were like, these numbers are totally fine. So we are discussing that with BPS. We're hoping to get a letter from them explaining that they are comfortable with the numbers. The magnitude for the next 10 years, they said, was likely to be the addition of one class in each grade. And they said that they believe that they could accommodate that.
And in the schools in our zone.
Yes.
In the Charlestown.
So all
Zone.
3 schools that have wait lists for the current classes, they said that they could add on another class. I'm so curious about that.
The issue is that we don't plan for schools. We don't have access to their wait lists. We give them our numbers, and then we trust that they know how the Boston Public School allotment system works. So it's such a separate planning process that while we talk to them, we are not allowed to do their planning.
So that would just make me concerned in terms of making sure that someone from BPS, and I know this has come up before, that, you know, you can't talk about BPS in terms of these meetings, which just feels frustrating, but what I imagine they're saying is within the zone that falls in Charlestown, there is enough room, which means that the reality is the schools in Charlestown are at or over capacity, but the schools within our Boston zone might have space. In which case, what you're talking about are school buses picking up kids from Charlestown, taking them out on our newly designed amazing transportation system infrastructure. So it's just, it feels like we should have BPS at the table for this kind of conversation as well.
Yeah.
Just because that doesn't feel, it feels misleading to say that, for them to be saying that to you, because it's not, it's not the facts. That's not what the facts are at all. So, I mean, obviously we can put a pin in that, but I feel frustrated that every time BPS comes up, it's that BPS is a different thing and we can't plan for BPS or react to BPS and I just think that, it's like a piece of the puzzle that is going to impact everything. If you're talking about busing kids out of here, then again, that's another component of transportation that I feel like we should be talking about.
Yeah, they shared some of their ideas for how they would handle it that are not public yet. And so they have other irons in the fire, I suppose. And I think my concern is that, like, if we brought BPS in, I worry that they also wouldn't be able to answer your questions to your satisfaction. I don't think that they can tell us in full detail why they're comfortable with the numbers. So it is one of those hard things where it's similar to the fire department, because like we're talking to the fire department about the level of development. I don't know how the fire emergency system works. If they tell me they're confident that they can handle it, the BPD's position is that we believe them. Or at least Plan Charlestown's position is that we believe them. But I do definitely hear your concern, and we are continuing this conversation with BPS.
My only other just thing that I'm going to throw in, and thank you for that. My only other thing would be to say that, I think that definitely partnering with the Mothers Association or the Preservation Society or the Chamber and, doing something in person at like the nights in conjunction with releasing this booklet and this hybrid plan would definitely go a long way. I know you guys have been resistant to things that are in person that are not, I know you did the walking tours and everything, but I think that definitely there needs to be some in-person meetings at this point. And, and that can be facilitated in different ways. And if you guys can commit to multiple, you could do one in the, after school time frame at the library. You could do one in the evening at the nights, so that you're hitting the different demographics, the different stakeholders and getting people there in person to react to these things.
Yeah, it's a great comment.
Those are all great comments. Nothing is scheduled yet because we want to kind of collect those ideas. I was looking at the calendar today to try to find the right time for like a maybe late March walking tour because I don't know, they work really well. But all to say we can get those on the books. Thanks, Shannon. All right, Kent. Oh, go ahead, Trish.
Sorry. Andrew, do you just want to give the ballpark square foot figures?
Sure. Yeah. So overall for scenario 3, and this is based on, really, kind of rough calculation, assuming that for all of the development areas that we're showing that everyone builds the most possible, they're kind of maxing out their site. So for that, it's in the kind of 21 million square foot range. We're talking about, quite a large, area of Charlestown. So that was our estimate there. That's including all uses. And then did you want me to share the residential estimates? Because I think Trish, your big asterisk was absolutely right. That there's a big range depending on how the mixed use zones get developed, whether they trend more residential or trend more commercial.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So I mean, I think the kind of middle number is in the kind of 5,500 unit range. So I think, by comparison, for scenario 1 and 2, scenario 1 was higher density, and that was at about 18 million square feet. So, our scenario is a little bit higher than that. Scenario 2 was more open space based, and you remember was all medium or low density and mixed use. So that was about 15 million by our calculations.
Thanks, Andrew. Any other advisory group members have questions or comments? We're gonna begin to wrap this up because we're 20 minutes over time, which is perfectly okay, because the presentation was long. We love to hear from people, but want to give advisory group members the last opportunity to wrap us up. Seeing and hearing none, I'm going to let Kent Edwards close us out tonight, and I am putting something in the chat. Go ahead, Kent.
Okay, thank you, Jason. It's very interesting to hear some of these comments, but the most poignant, I thought, were relating to the Charlestown Mothers Association. I think it's an interesting new change in conversation that I've heard previously. But I'd like to just point out that Plan Charlestown is not independent of what's going on with respect to the inclusive development program. And I think that's well understood. And so some of the questions that are being raised really will be answered by the new zoning decisions that are made as a result of the IDP. But aside from that, I'd like to get briefly into the weeds relating to the parks. And that is, there is a park to the southeast of the Austin Street parking lots called the Michael J. Galvin Park. And
Ken, I'm just going to ask you to keep it to under 3 minutes.
Where am I right now?
Yeah, you just started, but you said you were going to go on. So I just want to ask you to keep it.
I know you're fearful. That's
All
okay.
with love, buddy.
What I'm trying to get to, Jason, I'll try to make it as short as possible, is there is this park. And we have these parking lots, and there is intended to be some green space adjoining the Galvin Park. I wonder how many people even know it exists. It's just amazing. It's for World War II, a veteran who did a very heroic act for the rest of us. And I wonder if some of the green space in the parking spaces that is on the southeast side, which adjoins the Galvin Park, couldn't be used and dedicated to honor veterans. We have no place in Charlestown now for honoring veterans of the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. All the other wars are honored. And so that would be wonderful if that could be done. And as we look ahead to using the retail space, I'd recommend that home base or something of that sort be put at the bottom of the buildings, and that we encourage the solution of the homeless problem for veterans by putting in as much Section 8 housing as possible. That's it, Jason.
Thank you, Ken.
Yep.
Really appreciate the comments. Okay, I am gonna call the meeting to end. I think you'll hear from the BPDA sometime soon about next steps, but just want to really share my gratitude and appreciation for the members of the advisory group and the members of the public for joining us tonight. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.